Hey there, everybody. The purpose of this video is to explain why that I think Steven Avery is guilty. And for a long time, I was, for a long time I thought he was innocent. But then there were certain things that draw me away from that. And one thing was the blood in Teresa's RAV4. I mean, if the cops didn't put it there from the vial that they had at the clerk's office, how did anybody else get Steven Avery's blood? I mean, he's the only person that has his own blood, and the vial from the clerk's office that had his blood in it. Other than that, how would anybody else get his blood to plant it in the vehicle? So if it never came from Steven Avery, you would have to assume that it would have came from the blood vial, and then you'd have to assume that the cops is the one that planted it, and then you would also probably assume that the cops would have had something to do with her murder. Another thing that changed my mind about Steven Avery was the fact that during all the interrogations or the questioning that the police, when they were questioning him and would ask him about a fire, he never mentioned a fire. Never mentioned. They'd always ask him. He said no. He never had a burnt anything. He never burned anything the day that Teresa was on his property, and never had a fire whatsoever. But, and this is back from Making a Murderer, the first season. There's a phone conversation that he's talking with when he was in jail with Barb, and I think it may have been when maybe Brendan was first accused, or when he started to come into the picture of being involved in the murder, and Barb was asking him basically what happened that night, and Steven says that Brendan came over, they had the bonfire, and then Brendan went home. But in all the police interviews, he always denied having a fire or building a fire or burning anything within I think he said maybe a couple weeks before Teresa was on his property. So that's another thing that sort of got me thinking differently. Another thing is the phone calls that he made to Teresa's phone. There's several things that just don't make any sense. He called her at like 4:20 or something like that, after she had supposedly left, and wanted, and his explanation for calling her at this time was to ask her to come back and take a picture of a front, some kind of loader, but that's it. He never contacts them again to see if she could come out and check it. It was just like a spur of the moment type thing, and he never calls back. I mean, if it was that important that he wanted to sell it, why didn't he call back again? Or make an appointment? It was just like it's bullshit. it just doesn't make any sense. And one of the interrogations or the questionings, interviews that I'm thinking it was on one of the, I think November 6th interview from where they were up at Crivets or whatever, where there's a family's cabin was and all that. And what really surprised me was when I listened to this, it's like they didn't pursue it. They pretty much caught him in a lie, but they didn't pursue it for some reason, and I don't know why. Was They were asking what Steven did after Teresa left, and he said he went back into the house and then he went over to Bobby's. But Bobby was gone. I mean, but they got him they caught him in a lie. I mean, but then he started to try to backtrack, say, well, he went to Bobby's earlier that day, after he'd already said that he hadn't talked to Bobby that day. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's just, I mean, and you read all the files and everything, and of course, you know, you can come up with your own theories of how it happened. Only thing I'm not, I don't know what Brendan's role was in it, even if he had a role in it, but I do believe that Steven is guilty. And I think what started the whole innocence thing was how bogus that their explanation were King Kratz and law enforcement, how their explanation of how everything happened, you know, about him taking her into his trailer and all this stuff. I mean, that made no sense either. So I'm thinking that Steven was probably like, hey, that's not how this happened. So how can they charge me on evidence and say, you know, like this is how it happened, when, I mean, it never happened that way. He knows what happened, and he probably knew that there wouldn't be any evidence to support their scenario of how it all happened. So he's like, well, maybe, you know, I can get off of this. It just doesn't make any sense to sit and think about it. Plus, I mean, this has been going on for years, and every single at first Kathleen Zellner's it went from Ryan to was it Ryan and Scott, and that never went anywhere. You know, that he was the one that did it. It was proof, all this other stuff, and now it's to Bobby and Scott. Now they're the guilty ones. But I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, whoever did this would have had to have time to do it. They would have had to have a lot of time and a lot of alone time, and it just doesn't, to me. I can't. I mean, I just can't get past the phone calls and the blood and just that one interview, and I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking that, you know, he's guilty, and I think like I said, the only thing that's kept this going is the fact that it didn't happen the way that the prosecution said it happened, and he knows that, and maybe that's what he's feeding off of. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I guess we'll see what happens in the future. All right, thanks.